unpredictable world of fantasy sports, when all hope seems lost and chaos and confusion rule, one hero will rise. And change everything. GoingFor2.com. Because no one remembers the extra point.
What is going on, guys? All right, welcome to episode 90 of the Armchair Fantasy Show. I'm your host, of course, Jeff Lambert. You can follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. We are live every Friday night on Facebook Live, Periscope, Twitter, and YouTube, and of course syndicated on all your major podcast networks. I am here tonight, not with Mr. Ryan Searfoss, who some of y'all may have gotten used to seeing over the past month and a half, 2 months. I'm here with my DFS version of the podcast. First of all, we have Mr. Tim Strobel. Tim, how you doing tonight, man?
Man, I'm doing good. It's good to be back. NFL season's just right around the corner.
Yes, sir. I can't wait. And, of course, making all the noise there in the background through the entire intro has got to be Gerson. Gerson, how you doing tonight, man?
Oh, I'm doing good, man. I've been pumped, man. Since you told me we were going to do this podcast, I was like, oh, man, I can't wait. It's been too long, man.
Been too long. I know, it's been too long. We tried doing an NBA podcast. It just really didn't work out too well. It was too difficult to do. Football is the best because you can do football and include everything. You don't got to worry about what slate you're doing, everything else. It's the main slate. It's one time a week. It's much easier to do these podcasts. Before we get into the actual show, man, I know I've already talked to you on... what was that? What'd you say?
I was just saying, I felt like the draft show was forever ago.
Yeah, it was. It felt like it was like months and months ago, even though it was only a couple months. Yeah. So before we get to the show, though, Gerson, I know we've talked a little bit on, in our group chats and such, but the audience didn't know this. Just want to congratulate you on your huge win. You won, what was it, 50K in MLB about a month and a half ago, man. Congratulations. That is awesome. Good stuff, man. I saw that come across my feed. Unfortunately, it was with one of our rival groups that I saw it in, but I saw it and I was like, oh shit, Gerson won 50 grand. Good job, man. How'd it feel to win 50 grand?
Well, I've won big before, but this one was actually sweeter because it was in baseball, which is my hardest sport that I consider it's just a headache, man. But I finally figured it out, and I'm having a hell of a year this year. I mean, I've won more than, let's just say it's more than upper range of closer to 100K. But, I saved a lot of that for football season, so I'm excited for football, because football is my love. I mean, it's basketball first, but the football season, doing the podcast and stuff is awesome. So, and you guys know I multi-entry almost a lot of tournaments, so I can't wait.
Yeah, man. I'm
going for that Millie Maker this year, huh, guys?
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, that would be awesome, man. Week 1 Millie Maker, that would be awesome if you hit that. Woo. All right, so we got a lot to talk about tonight, guys. I know there's not any games going on, so we're not breaking down players or anything like that. We're going to talk strategy tonight. And I know this is something that both of you love to talk about. A lot of times on the podcast, because we're limited to an hour, we can't really get into strategy. We talk mostly about just the plays of the day. So I thought we'd get in, about a month away from the preseason and get some strategy going here. So to kick it off, let's go ahead and start off with some of the basics here in GPP versus cash, building your rosters. How do you do them differently? just go ahead and give the difference of the two. What's a GPP roster compared to a cash roster? Gerson, we'll go to you first since you had the big win in the GPPs. How do you go about building your rosters differently between cash and GPPs?
Well, it's just depends what type of player you are, because a lot of people build their roster differently, of course. I build my roster with high upside always. I always look for high upside, high risk, high reward in GPP. I do a lot of stacking. I do a lot of correlation. I use optimizers. I use projections. I use ownership. But the biggest thing with GPP is just you're looking for high ceiling players. But also you want to relatively get a floor for them too. You don't just want to put, Albert Wilson for the Miami Dolphins, but apparently he won a million maker one week with Brock Osweiler. So, like, a player like him, like all your roster, I'm going to go all on him. You want players like Traquan Smith. He's like probably 4,600, very cheap, kind of there, but he has a high ceiling, like he had a ceiling that he can get that 30-point. He had a 30-point outburst. I think it was on Monday Night Football.
Yep.
We all did good that day. I remember we all played Showdown, so we killed it. But, you want to look for players that you think are lowly owned with high ceilings, high upside in GPP. In cash game, for me, I always do this, and Tim knows it. I don't play much cash games, but my brother does, and you guys know he's the cash game king. So the way we always construct our roster is safety, floor, safety, upside, and what's the third one? Volume.
Yep.
So those are the three key components that I usually put. Of course, you can put other factors like Vegas, opportunity, defense first position, DVOA, all this sort of stuff. It's like one big combo meal, when you order your food, you want a fry, you want a hamburger, you want bacon on it, you want a shake, you're just a fat ass, you just want to eat it all, but, you can't, you got to pick your poison, But that's how I build my GPP roster with cash game. We could go more in depth, but I think Tim can cover a little more.
Yeah, Tim, go ahead and talk about it. I know you play a little bit evenly on both as far as GPPs and cash, because you're not really heavy on one or the other, are you?
I do. You're right. I tend to play pretty even. I probably play more cash in NFL than any other sport, and a lot of that's just due to the volume available. I mean, I think NFL is far and away the most played sport, especially among casual fans. So there's more cash game opportunities in NFL than you're going to see in other sports. For that reason. But, I mean, Gerson made some great points. I mean, in cash games, especially for NFL, there's going to be some players every week that you've got to have in your cash games, because if you don't, they're just going to kill you. Whereas in GPP, you get a little bit more you have more of an option to kind of change it up. You can put a bunch of players on one team. If there's one guy that's going to be a chalk, like running back, who's going to be a value, who's filling in, you can say, you know what, I don't have the same projection for him that everybody else does. I'm going to take the shot in the tournament to fade him and then hope that he doesn't go off, so I have a much bigger advantage over the field. So I think NFL, there's a lot more variance in the outcomes of what you can have from week to week. And so it gives you a little different roster construction you might see in some other sports.
Yeah, I'm with you both on that. I mean, in cash games, you almost, what they call eat the chalk. You basically want to get those chalk plays, because if that chalk play goes off and you don't have him, you're pretty much done at that point. You want to basically sort of mediate the risk there by having the guys that are going to be highly owned, and then hopefully the guys that you don't have that are the super chalk plays end up being really good. And all you got to beat is half the field, really, for cash games. You don't need to be the top guy. You don't need to be the top 5, top 10. You just got to beat half the field. And as long as you can do that, then you're good to go. And beating half the field requires eating the chalk sometimes.
It's funny because we say eat the chalk, right? But people don't realize that there's two positions that can considerably never be like highly owned or can be the difference maker. In my opinion, there's the tight end position and the defensive position. You want to eat the chalk at running back, wide receiver, and quarterback. You always want to eat those chalk because everybody can own them. I remember one week when there was the New Orleans Saints and there was Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara was underpriced because Mark Ingram came back. Michael Thomas was a high-priced wide receiver, but he wasn't at that elite price where we usually were getting him, and that roster was like the most optimal roster. And I put the roster out there, like after I did my weekly, the week finish, I put it on my Facebook group, and I had like 8 people tell me, "Hey, I had that roster." I'm like, "Well, yeah, because it's the optimal roster,
Right.
Everybody was on the same plays. If you were smart enough and you did your research, you got those same players.
Agreed. So we're going to just kind of roll right into roster construction, since we're kind of talking about constructing our cash lineups and our GPP rosters. And one thing I wanted to go to you, Tim, first is talk about a little bit about stacking and correlation, like what it means and how you go about stacking differently in a GPP as you do in a cash game.
Yeah, absolutely. In NFL, a lot of times, especially for your cash game rosters, you're not going to want a lot more than probably either one skill position player and then plus maybe a quarterback. So common stacks are going to be your quarterback and your wide receiver 1, your quarterback and your tight end. Sometimes, depending on the offensive quarterback and a running back, even though the correlation isn't necessarily as high there. But when you're starting to get into stacking, when you're looking at GPP, like Gerson said, if there's going to be a game that just has a tremendous amount of upside, you might want to put 2, 3, 4 players from that game on your roster in a tournament lineup that you might not put in your cash game. So, like he said, the Saints are famous for this. Last year, like he said, there were multiple weeks where Kamara and Thomas were both in the optimal lineups. I think 2 years ago, there were weeks where Mark Ingram and Kamara were both in the optimal lineups. So you got to get NFL. You got to get a little bit more creative in order to take down one of those large field GPPs, because so many of the chalk cash plays end up getting played highly in tournaments as well. So you got to have a way to be able to separate yourself from the field, and stacking is a great way to do that. And then me and Gerson, I know we're both big believers in running it back. And so what that is if there's one team that you expect to score a ton of points, a lot of times you're going to expect the other team to have to try and keep in the game. And so you'll see me do something like a quarterback, a running back, and a wide receiver from one team, and then run it back with a wide receiver or tight end from the other team, because we know they're going to have to be throwing a lot if they get down. So those are a lot of stacks that you'll see people running in tournaments. You just got to get a little bit creative if you want to make your way all the way to the top.
Yeah, it's something that I always tell people that just now sort of getting into the game. It's a lot of times they go into their rosters and they're looking at their season-long, style of doing things where they're trying to get a little bit of everything. You don't want to have 2 receivers from the same team. You don't want to have a quarterback receiver from the same team because they have a bad week. But you're looking at 1 week. Just a snapshot in time. 1 week, you want to have that big week. Like, what was it? The Chiefs-Rams game last year that was like 49-52. If you had exposure to that game, if you had 2, 3, 4 guys from that game, you probably did really well that week because that was the game to stack. But sometimes less is more. Not trying to get every single team or every single game exposure. Getting the right games, getting the ones that are going to be the high-scoring games that you get 3, 4 players from that will really kind of put you over the top there. Gerson, I know you want to talk a little bit about optimizer and projections a little bit. So go ahead and talk about that with your roster construction and how you utilize those.
So I wanted to touch something on what Tim was talking about, correlation, if you don't mind for a second. So these are the rankings that they've gotten from data from DraftKings, CSV files, and basically all the information you can get from, just data. These were the rankings of the stacking. Quarterback, wide receiver 1 were the strongest correlation with a positive. Then there was quarterback, wide receiver 2, and quarterback, tight end 1 were actually they were equal. They're very close together. And then there was some positive correlation between quarterback and the opposing team, wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. And then there was a quarterback, there was a running back 1 and the defense with a fair correlation, but not too high. Not as great a correlation as the other one. They were like all these ones, and then they were down there. It does work sometimes. But then there's a very interesting one. There's a quarterback correlation. What I mean by that, there's one quarterback, let's say, New Orleans Saints versus the Rams.
Right.
You guys remember that game?
Yep.
Okay, there's Drew Brees, and then there was Jared Goff, Of course, if Drew Brees goes off at home, he's either going to score like 40 points with his team. That means Jared Goff runs that correlation back to that team. So if you're making 150 rosters, you probably want to have those 2 quarterbacks correlating to each other's in-game roster exposure, But leading the exposures and all that to what Jeff is covering, optimizer, the ownership projection. I've come over the years to become a big nerd about that. And Jeff and a lot of people in our group chat have noticed that. I do my research, but then I really simplify it by using Optimizer. And the best optimizer out there, in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, I don't get paid by them, I'm not a sponsorship by them, is Fantasy Cruncher.
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy Cruncher is the best in the industry. And the people that are professionals, like Osimo, Chipotle Addict, Asani, there's a bunch of them. There's a lot of them out there, They use Fantasy Cruncher. They tell you they're not using it, they're lying to you. Osimo has now partnered. If you don't know who Osimo is, he's the best player in the world next to Jeff Lambert. So just letting everybody know here. But he's ranked number one. He's been ranked number one for what, 3 years now? 4 years probably?
Yep.
But he joined with Fantasy Cruncher, and one of the most interesting things is he uses his ownership projection now with the optimizer. So when I say ownership, and earlier on I said everybody played the optimal roster, right? How did they get that? They probably, got ownership from a certain website. They said, oh, I like this player. Yeah, that's highly owned. Yeah. And then you just fill it in. It's almost like tic-tac-toe, to be honest. Maybe not as much, but you guys know what I mean. Pretty easy step by step. And then there's optimizers. Like, there's rules, there's settings that you can control. And that's where it gets really nitty and gritty, because what you make of that optimizer is what you create. And it's not going to lie to you. If you put out Brock Osweiler 150 times, that's your fault, It's not going to make a fake roster for you. So the thing is, I tell people, optimizers are the next level thing. If you want to win at a high success, you have to learn how to use it. You can't just go in there and be like, hey, optimize. Yeah, I'm going to play that roster. Because guess what? That roster probably is just a basic projection. Now, projection. I know, Jeff, you still partner with DFN, Daily Fantasy Nerd?
I do, yep.
Okay, Daily Fantasy Nerd has projection. There's a lot of projection sites out there. I'm not going to plug them in because we don't get sponsored by them. So you can pick your own projection, but you got to remember, projections can be changed by you. So if I feel like the New Orleans Saints are going to score 10 points and Jeff and Tim are laughing at me, I'm going to put 10 points, But it's just, you control everything, but you have to learn how to use it. There's a lot of tutorials out there on YouTube that are hard to use. I mean, I learned this stuff. Took me hundreds of hours of studying and researching, watching YouTube videos, and it's free. You can go to Fantasy Cruncher and use a lineup rewind where you can go back and learn how to use it. It's free. But that's just my opinion on optimizer, projection, and ownership. I think they're very critical in the process if you're playing how do you say it?
Mass multi-entry.
Yeah, mass multi-entry.
MME.
Yeah. MME. That's why we say MME. We don't say and it's also helpful for cash game. Ownership has become a big critical part of people building construction for cash game. And I've learned to use it over a couple years. I'm just an idiot and don't play cash games. I don't know why. I find it boring, dude.
Well, when you win $50K, you don't have to play cash games very often.
That's right. Yeah. And I just want to touch on something Gerson said real quick, because I think he made a great point, is that especially in the NFL, you're going to see a lot of people that are kind of stacking or kind of focusing on a couple of games on the schedule. And for the most part, I think that's probably the way to go in a lot of your cash games. But as Gerson said, if you want to take down a GPP, especially one of these large field GPPs that you see in NFL where there's 200,000 plus entries, then you got to kind of look at it and say, go against the grain a little bit. He made a great point earlier. One of the Millie Maker winners last year was a Brock Osweiler, Albert Wilson stack. And part of the reason they won is because nobody had it. But they looked at the schedule and they were like, no, everybody's going to see this game going this way. I see the game going that way. So I'm going to take my chances and see if it goes. Now, a lot of times it may not work out for you, but all you got to do is have it hit one time and it'll pay off.
Right.
So I remember
$1 million, one chance.
Yes, exactly right. So I think another thing in NFL that you'll see almost every week is that while, as Gerson said, the people that consistently make the most money are the ones that are doing these mass multi-entries, NFL, the milli maker, is consistently won by people who have 1, 2, 3 entries. So, while I do preach to often that contest selection is second only to roster selection, that if you don't have a large bankroll, you really got to be picky in what contests you're putting your lineups in. On the flip side, don't believe that you can't win a large field GPP if you have a good feeling. If I got a good feeling this is going to work out. Everybody's going this way, I'm going to go that way. We always talk about if you play cash games, great. It's a great way to build your bankroll, but always throw it in the GPP. We always talk about the story of our buddy Matt Sandell a couple years ago in baseball. He put out an article, and he was playing cash games. He said, this is my cash game roster this week. It ended up being the #1 overall roster on the week, and one of the guys who read the article threw it in a GPP, and I think he won $10,000.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing. If you want to be a GPP-only player, you can certainly be successful that way. But if you're going to play mostly cash games, always throw your roster in a big tournament because you never know if it might hit.
Yeah, just to continue on that story for those that haven't heard the story. So Matt wrote this article, cash game roster, put it, out there for everybody to read. So, it tweets out through my account. So the next morning I'm getting, tweets from everybody like, oh man, that was a great roster, and show me like pictures of their lineup. I won 10K, I won 7K, I won this, I won that. So I text Matt and I'm like, Matt, that roster was amazing, man. Everybody's showing me all these pictures. Like, how much did you win on that roster last night? He's like, man, I only put it in a $1 50-50. I won $1.80.
Yep.
That's the greatest story, man. I tell that story all the time. He hates me for it, but I love that story. Just to go back on a few things that y'all talked about, just to reiterate one more time, and something that Gerson mentioned that I hadn't even really thought about when it comes to correlations is, I think of correlations because I don't play I don't play MME very often, so I think of correlations as inside my own roster. I'm thinking, correlations of, quarterback, receiver with the receiver on the other side, whereas Gerson, because he entered so many rosters, he's thinking correlations from roster to roster. So he may have, 25 Drew Brees, rosters, but then he might have the same amount of Jared Goff rosters as well, to have that correlation as well, to get that exposure to both sides. So definitely interesting point on there, Gerson. And then the other thing I want to talk about too is some of the people out there that listen to this podcast hear us talking about ownership and you got to be different to win GPPs. If you're playing small money, if you're playing $5-10 a night, don't go crazy with the low ownership. You still got to score fantasy points. Because you have the lowest owned player on the roster does not mean that you're going to win anything. You still got to score the fantasy points. So do your research. I used to get a text from this guy like every week. It was NBA, not NFL, but he would send a roster with like 3 guys and like, man, low ownership. No one's going to have these guys. And I'm like, but they score 10 fantasy points. It's not going to help you. It doesn't matter that they have the low ownership. You got to have the fantasy points to go along with it. So do your research. Don't overexpose yourself to these low-owned guys because they don't always pan out. And honestly, more often than not, they don't pan out. But you want to hit the ones that do because that's when you win 50K.
Yeah, in NFL, you see a lot that the lineups that take down these big tournaments usually have 2, 3, 4 guys that are considered chalk, and then a couple of guys that aren't. So there's no need to just say, okay, well, I'm making a tournament lineup, I have to fade all the chalk. No. A lot of times chalk's for a reason. So you always want to play the best guys. It was play all the dudes, right? You can't exclusively look at ownership because, like he said, you're going to end up having a bunch of bottom roster guys, and you'll just never win anything.
Yep.
We have a thing that we always say, and I know we say it in our group. We say, don't get cute with it.
Yep.
Don't, because as soon as you start saying, oh, I think this is sneaky. Oh, well, I got news for you. That's a shit play. That's not a good play. You can do your research. There's so much free information out there. GoingFor2 is a great website. They have a lot of good stuff. I mean, I'm not being like a homer here, but I mean, they have some great writers, man. So like, you take their advice, you can take it, but always take advice with a grain of salt. Don't always be like, oh yeah, this is great advice. You do your own research, read the articles, and then go from there. But I always tell people it only takes 2 or 3 guys in your GPP roster for you to win big money. You can eat the chalk, and that's it.
Yep, agreed, 100%. I just realized too that my green screen seems to be messing up, so I apologize if you're looking at a green screen right now. I apologize. I don't know if it's showing up on Facebook or not, but a little bit of issues here. But hopefully it's showing up right, at least on the viewer side. All right, so let's go talk about a little bit about Vegas now. I know Tim, I'm gonna go to you first because I know you're, we all look at Vegas, but Tim looks at Vegas a little bit differently than some of us do. And yeah, he has like the
goggles.
Yeah, exactly. Tim is the one that he's following Vegas, pretty much all day long during the lead up to the games. He knows the lineup change. I mean, the spread changes and everything else. So Tim, go ahead and break down what you do looking at Vegas totals.
Yeah, absolutely. That's usually the first place I start every week. I mean, and this is regardless of sport. Like, I know we're doing an NFL podcast right now, and it's definitely applicable to NFL, but I do this in every sport because Vegas so often gives us the great starting place for us to be able to say, look, these are the games that I'm going to target for large exposure. And like he said, I mean, in NFL, you're going to see a lot of games that are consistently have a Vegas, total of 40 to 42 points, right? That's pretty standard in NFL. But when you start seeing games get up to 46, 48, 50 points plus projected, then you start saying, okay, these are games that I'm going to want to have more exposure to, especially if I'm going to be making a lot of lineups. But what you said about the changes in Vegas lines is probably one of my favorite things. When the lines first come out, they tend to change a lot. And so they'll move during the week, and a lot of times they'll move a lot on Sunday morning. So what I always like to do is one of the first things I do when I wake up on Sunday morning before rosters lock is pull up the Vegas dashboard and see how much the lines have moved. A lot of times weather will cause the lines to move. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But you always got to keep an eye on the movement of those lines because a lot of times, Vegas has privy to information that a lot of us aren't. And if we see, okay, there's this game has dropped off significantly, then there may be a mitigating factor there because, those guys in Vegas, it's all money for them, right? It's the big money. They got to make sure that they don't get, taken. So they're always going to be adjusting those lines constantly, and we can utilize that information in our own rosters to kind of make sure, okay, we're going to be a little bit heavier on this one, or I don't really like this one, so I'm going to be a little bit lighter than the field. So, that's one of my favorite things to do is watch the movement in Vegas lines over the course of the week to try and figure out if I want to change my exposures to certain games.
Yeah, just go on that point about how it's big money for Vegas and they have information that we don't have. So I play a lot of preseason NFL, which of course you have to use the beat reporters to pretty much figure out who the hell's playing. Well, Vegas does that all season long. They got people on the ground at all these games getting information on weather and everything else. So those things get relayed back to Vegas that end up changing those lines. So there's things that they kind of know ahead of us. So if you watch those lines change, those guys betting big money and moving those lines, there's a reason those lines are moving. So it's something you want to pay attention to for sure. Gerson, how do you use Vegas when you do your lineups? He's just sleeping.
Me? No, you froze up for a second. Sorry, Jeff. So when I use Vegas, I basically implicate, all right, these are my top games, right away. And then I eliminate those games that the bottom games, okay, let's say you get Vegas, right? And there's a 59.7 over under, and it's the Chiefs versus the Patriots. You're obviously going to target that game, right? And then you're going to go to the next game, which could be, I shoot it a little bit. I have a bunch of, so Buccaneers versus Falcons, 57.5. The Steelers versus Bengals, 53. But now let's go to the bottom. Jaguars versus Cowboys, 40. Ravens versus Titans, 41. So when you get the bottom game, you can target a lot of those defense. Those defensive teams, there's a reason why Vegas doesn't have them scoring a lot of points. Either the defense is great, facing a very shitty offense like Blake Bortles, just facing the Bills offense, a terrible offense. Just a Dolphins, another terrible offense. But everybody knew, when Tampa Bay was playing, we knew whoever they were playing, it was going to be a high-paced game.
Yep.
We knew it was going to be a lot of scoring. We knew there was going to be no defense. We knew Tampa Bay can actually keep up with the other team and score points too. I mean, unless there was one game where they legit scored field goals after field goals after field goals. I can't remember what game it was, but
it's because they couldn't run the ball.
It was against the Bears, I think. I can't remember though.
I think it was. Yeah. Right.
But the Bears had a really stout red zone defense, and they couldn't score. But that was like one game of the year, you know. Every other game, Tampa Bay was getting like ramped on. Like they were scoring. I mean, they were either allowing a lot of points. Well, they were doing both, allowing a lot of points and scoring a lot of points. And of course, it was without Jameis Winston. It was with Ryan Fitzpatrick. You know, Jeff? You know that guy?
I know that guy
Magic,
a little bit.
Baby. Some respect on his name.
Yeah, it's that beard, man.
Yeah, man. One thing Gerson touched on that I think is huge is that in addition to the over-under that you're going to be looking at about stacking, is you definitely want to take a look at the spreads as well. Because a lot of time when a team is favored significantly over another team, that's somebody that you're going to want to look at on defense. And a lot of times you're going to want to pair a running back with that defense because you're going to expect that team's going to get ahead and stay ahead and force the other team to try and play catch-up. So it's another one of the stacks that we mentioned earlier. One of my favorite stacks is a running back with their defense, especially if the Vegas spread says, if the Vegas spread starts at, say, team's going to win by 10, and then they're going to win by 12, and all of a sudden they're going to win by 14, that's Vegas' way of saying, hey, this other team is not going to score. Play the defense. They're going to be catching up the whole time. What's that, G?
Unless it's the Bills-Vikings, like it was last year when we all played the Vikings.
Thanks a lot, Vikings. Latavius Murray and Vikings defense, and then you fucking go out and allow like what? I think it was like 40 points.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Bills.
Everyone played the defense that week. Everybody played the Vikings defense that week. That was crazy.
And everybody that played the Vikings defense and Latavius Murray said, this is going to blow up in our face. And what do you know?
It did.
But then again, remember, it was when the Dolphins, it was the very next week, the Dolphins versus the Bears. And the Dolphins, we're going to play Brock Osweiler at the last second. And everybody's like, let's play the Bears defense.
Yep.
Next thing we know, the Bears allowed like 35 points or something like that. So,
you never know.
Vegas is never perfect.
Yep. True story.
I agree with that.
All right, let's take a quick commercial break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about some buzzwords and some DFS myths. So hold tight, guys.
Fantasy football. It's not just a social interaction anymore. Today's manager plays to win, and the difference between winning and losing is so small, a manager will do whatever it takes to get an edge. Yet the other sites offer the same content at an extremely high cost. It's time to get away from the old and step into the future of fantasy stats. This is StatRoute. StatRoute allows you to find any data set for any player or team in 7 seconds or less, all on a simple, easy-to-use application. Want to see which running back performed best in the snow last season? How about the past 5 seasons? And in the fourth quarter? Or maybe you're unsure of which quarterback to start for the upcoming week. With our Stats IP technology, you can now quickly see how Matt Stafford has performed in the rain, during the second half of the season, in New York, compared with how Russell Wilson has played during primetime games, at home, versus the Rams' new defensive coordinator, Wade Phillips. At StatRoute, it's our mission to deliver state-of-the-art technology guaranteed to keep you ahead of the curve. So, whether you're a casual football fan, a weekly fantasy trash talker, or a DFS hustler, we've got you covered. Welcome to the new standard for stats delivery. We are StatRoute. Take back your league.
All right, guys, welcome back. I'm here with Tim and Gerson, and we are talking NFL DFS strategy in July. You got to love it. We got a couple things that I want to talk about in a minute here, but first I want to mention our sponsor, StatRoute. They're great for DFS, guys. They're a great tool to use. There's things that they do that nobody else does, like you heard in the commercial there, that you can look at players versus a certain defensive coordinator. So when a guy changes teams to a different team, you can see how that quarterback or that running back does against that defensive coordinator. It's a great tool. It shows you weather, how players play in the rain, how they play in the snow. It gives you all kinds of splits that you can't get elsewhere. So it's a great tool. If you use my promo code GF2FF, you get 50% off your subscription for a year. You can't beat that. So GF2FF for statroute.com. So check it out for sure. All right, guys, let's talk some buzzwords here. The first one we're going to talk about here is it was actually part of the Facebook poll that I put out. Someone mentioned they wanted us to talk about DVOA, which is a very, very complicated algorithm. I don't want to get into the very complicated part of it, but Gerson, if you can just sort of give us the Barney version of DVOA and what it means and how you use it.
So DVOA stands for Defense Adjusted Value Over Average. Basically, what it calculates is the offense that's facing the defense. And basically, it narrows it down basically to the defense that they can currently playing, not over the whole season like DVP, which means DVP usually takes whatever data they have currently to versus like, oh, well, guess what? Tampa Bay allowed 37 points, and the quarterback got 6 touchdowns. Well, actually, that wouldn't make sense. 4 touchdowns versus them, Oh, heck yeah, I'm going to play that quarterback, But it doesn't take into the fact that who the opponent was.
Right.
DVOA does. It takes into the fact that whoever they face or what they're facing throughout the season. It takes the rankings. It's like a big algorithm altogether. Yeah. I trust DVOA more than I trust defense first position.
Agreed.
Because I think defense, which is one of the things we're going to cover, I think defense first position is very, it has it, I guess you can say, like, sketchy part, like, kind of like false. But I love DVOA. I use it for my research. I use it for every position, from running back 1 to pass catching running back to quarterback to wide receiver 2. And Jeff, I don't know how you do it. I swear to God, every week you find that wide receiver 2 in a great DVOA matchup. And I do listen to you most of the time.
Yeah. Most of the time.
Whoa, come on, man.
I'm just messing with you.
Grain of salt, bro. And then, tight end. And then one of the best part is there's DVOA not only takes into account that, but it breaks it down so quick that if I know Ezekiel Elliott is playing the Miami Dolphins, okay. Everybody was like, why is Miami Dolphins so low on DVOA? Like, it's such a good matchup. Like Miami Dolphins didn't allow a lot of rushing touchdowns. They allowed a lot of rushing yards. And then if you guys remember, DVOA wide receiver 1, there was Xavier Howard.
Yep.
Who was covering the wide receiver 1, but they were highly ranked. Why? Because Xavier Howard would always cover the wide receiver 1. Yep. They take that into adjustment. That's why I love DVOA.
Yeah,
I completely agree with Gerson there. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like he said, DVP definitely has its place, but it's almost like a base level analysis. And DVOA, I think, is that next level analysis. I mean, it's a ranking created by Football Outsiders, so we got to give them props on that. Yep. I know DVOA was getting a lot of flack last year, but as like Gerson said, I still think it's the most accessible tool for looking at last year, right? So if you looked at them, their DVOA was consistently the worst against the pass. But if you looked at it individually, like you said, they might be worse against wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 3s than they were against 2s, right? And like you said, Xavier Howard for the Dolphins, you consistently didn't want to play the guy that was matching up against him. There are other ones like Rhodes, like Xavier Rhodes for the Vikings. A lot of these guys where they have these premier number 1 cornerbacks. Yeah, they may give up some passing yards, but they're not going to give it up at that position. So you got to look at the DVOA, you got to look at the matchups and say, okay, where are teams going to look to target this defense? How are they going to try and move the ball? And I think that DVOA is a great way to look at that. Yeah. We talked about it on the show before. I know Gerson, me, with a number of other people, one of the first things we look at every week during the NFL season is the first look because it has all the games broken down with the DVOA. It has all the Vegas lines. It has adjusted line yards. It has sack rates. It's one of the best starting tools each week for building your roster. So I highly recommend it. I bookmark it pretty much every week, and I consistently come back to it over and over again. So.
It should be your first thing you look at, no matter what.
That's Roto-Grinders, right?
The best part is it's up like on Sunday night, like before Monday comes. So like if you're ready if you already won $1 million like Jeff Lambert, and you're like, oh yeah, I can't wait till next week. I'm gonna dominate. Let's see what's on the lineup. It's like you know what you're getting. You know what you're gonna eat before you eat it. You know.
Yep.
That's the best part. So big shout out to Derek Farnworth and Roto Grinders. That is an excellent part. That's probably the only thing I use from Roto Grinders besides a lot of other tools that I use. But that thing, it's free. It's free.
Right.
So that's the best part. So I love that. Great shout out to that, Tim. I was gonna say it earlier on, but I'm glad you covered it.
Good stuff. All right, the next buzzword I got on here, I was actually asked this one specifically, which is why I brought it up. I don't use it a lot personally. I know Gerson hates this stat here. So, Tim, we're going to let you talk about this one. This is ADOT, what it actually means and how you use it.
Yeah, so ADOT stands for Average Depth of Target. This is a statistic that people look at to try and figure out how often a receiver is targeted down the field and how many yards down the field they are. A lot of times this is, as Gerson is obviously alluding to over there, it's a stat that doesn't mean very much because a lot of times these offenses are slated for these guys to get the ball close to the line, but they're still able to consistently score. And I think that one of the great examples I can always think of, especially last year, was going to be Keenan Allen versus Willie Snead, right? So Keenan Allen consistently had one of the lower ADOTs in the league, but his volume was so high that it didn't matter. Right? Like he may only be getting an ADOT of, 7 and 9 yards or something like that. But when you're talking about 10 to 12, targets a game, then at that point it's definitely viable. But then you're going to get somebody like Willie Snead, who for most of the season, I think had Lamar Jackson as his quarterback. His average depth of target was like 5 to 7 yards, but he was only getting like 5 targets. So at that point, there's no upside in the play. There's no real reason to look there. Because while we do want that floor in our lineups, especially for our cash games, as Gerson said, if there's no upside, then you can't really play him even in cash games. I know a couple years ago there were people that were saying, we'll talk about value later, but people were saying, okay, well, I'm going to get 3 times value out of this guy. He's $3K. As long as he gives me 9 points, he pays off his value. And I think that's the way that the NFL is right now is so high scoring. You can't afford to take a sub 10 point. You can't even a lot of times take a player that has under 15 points. So if you're going to play a guy that's a min value guy, you're hoping for much more than that return. You're looking for 4, 5, 6 times value because there's going to be other players that are going to be, slightly more money that are going to be able to eclipse that. So if you're looking at a player whose average depth of target is pretty low, my first thing I look at is how much volume they get. Because if they get a high amount of volume with a low ADOT, they always have the opportunity to bust a play. But if they have low volume and a low ADOT, then there's almost no upside there.
Agreed. How does ADOT compare to air yards?
So air yards is more, consistently like down the field, right? So air yards is more of a ranking of how often is a receiver targeted like down the field. And I think it's a...
Air yard is the vertical attempt on the moment the ball is caught in into the line of scrimmage. Down, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
what is he? A straight runner, right?
Gerson, say that again because you were breaking up. Say that one more time because you were breaking up.
Okay, so air yard is the vertical yard on a pass attempt at the moment the ball is caught in the relation of the line of scrimmage. Basically what it means is Joe Flacco, since we know he's a freaking terrible quarterback and the Denver Broncos were dumb enough to actually want him. Throw the ball to John Brown how many times down the field, right? But the ball is not caught.
Yeah.
But all those yards that he threw to John Brown, those are the yards he gained on an air yard.
Right.
I almost said a yard. Air yard. So from the point of the release to the point of the reception, basically. But even if it's incomplete, it still counts as air yard. This is why, me personally, and this is my personal opinion, you can take it how you want. I think air yard and ADOT are a bunch of bullshit stats. Because in reality, are we really going to play John Brown every week, even though he's leading air yard? He's, I think he was ranked number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's a top 10 air yard, If he's not catching the ball, what good is it going to do us?
Doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, of course, there's guys like Julio Jones, Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins. Hold on, let me rephrase that. Julio Jones, Jeff Lambert's boyfriend, Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, Antonio Brown, Tyreek, Jarvis Landry, for example. You guys remember Jarvis Landry?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was getting a ton of receptions, right? But yeah, and he was getting the ball thrown at him. But did he really produce that many fantasy points for us week in, week out? No. Right. When Baker Mayfield came in there with him, Jarvis Landry's value
plummeted.
Went down.
Yep.
But to me, that's just my personal opinion. I'd rather look at volume, reception, target, obviously the quarterback in Vegas, you know?
Yep.
But it's just, to me, I think people overanalyze stats to a point where they want to sound so smart, and they put it into, like, this used to be me, and Jeff used to hate me because I would make the podcast, like, 1 hour later. But I changed more toward projections and other stuff. But if you can use it, sure. But what good is it going to do you? Be like, oh, dang, John Brown got 400 air yards?
But he only had one catch.
Yeah, he only had one catch. Well, yeah, that's maybe because Joe Flacco was overthrowing him every time.
Yeah, QOT, quality of targets. Right. I think that's what Gerson's talking about here. Yeah, a player may be consistently targeted down the field, but if those are not quality targets, they're not helping you out. So, yes, you can look at it and say this guy is number one in the league in terms of air yards, but if he's only being targeted a couple times a game and they're not quality targets, you're just fishing, in my opinion. Yeah, there may be a game where he ends up busting a long one, and if you had him, good job. But most of the time, he's going to burn you because those are not quality targets.
Agreed. All right, so the next thing I want to get into here is something that, Tim, I know you're really big on this one, and you always have this little sheet that you send us out in our group chats that, you know, is really helpful. And I actually think this year I'm going to actually pay for it myself, so I have access to it as well. But it's the wide receiver and cornerback matchups that are sent out. I believe is it Mike Clay that sends it out?
It is. I'm going to, again, I know we kind of been doing a little bit of promo on this show, so I might as well jump on that train. There aren't very many services that I subscribe to. I do most of my NFL research myself and with the guys in our group chat. But one of the things I do pay for, it's now on ESPN Plus, is for Mike Clay's weekly wide receiver quarterback matchup. If you subscribe to PFF, they have a really good one too. So I don't think that there's a need to really go out and pay for this service as well. But matchups are huge. I mean, more so than any other sport. I think weekly being able to target the bad cornerbacks against the team is much more effective than, like we talked about earlier, just looking at DVP. You know, all too often teams will have one strong corner, they'll have like a weak corner and then like a nickel corner. And if you know consistently, well, my quarterback's going to consistently target his slot guy. Like a big example I remember last year was Jared Goff and
Cooper Kupp.
What's his name? Help me out.
Cooper Kupp or Robert.
Yeah, Cooper Kupp. That's exactly right. So if you saw one of those opportunities where Cooper Kupp was matched up against a terrible slot corner, that's just free money, man. You're going to attack that all day long. So weekly, I think the Rams are a really good example. I think last year they consistently had all three wide receivers plays, and the way that they scaled it week by week was based on the matchups they had. So there would be 1 week where it would be Brandon Cooks. The next week it would be Robert Woods. The next week it would be Cooper Kupp. And if you're thinking, oh, they're just picking these at random, it's not random. It's usually based upon the matchups. So, yes, there are always guys that are going to move around, but usually a lot of guys will tend to line up in one spot more than others. So if you know they're going to be lined up on the left side consistently, they're going to be seeing the right cornerback on the defense. If that right corner is the strong corner, you might want to look the other way and vice versa. So, yes, I'm a big fan of those matchups. Obviously, the teams will sometimes shadow, and we've talked about that before. If there is one big offensive threat at wide receiver, a lot of times teams will take their best corner. I know for years, Patrick Peterson did this with the Cardinals. They would just say every week, Patrick, that's your guy, take him out of the game. And a lot of times he would. I think last year the Cardinals played more zone and they kind of got killed because of it. Mm-hmm. And so you weren't it wasn't as necessary for you to fade that number one wide receiver. But you really want to pay attention to that. It's scheme and it's matchup. if teams are going to be playing a lot of man, then you're going to be looking at that matchup all day long. So, just play it all, play it until it, wins you all the money.
Yep.
But, yeah, so that's huge. I mean, I think wide receiver cornerback matchups is definitely something that if you're not paying attention to, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, it's a great tool because, I started using it, and the thing that I liked it for was it shows you the cornerbacks that do move and then the ones that don't move. Because you have your receivers that line up on the left side or the right side mostly. So the perfect example was, I know it's a couple years ago, but was Richard Sherman when he was still with the Seahawks. He stayed on one side of the field. Literally, that was all he ever did. So if you had a receiver that lined up on the other side of the field, you would use him over using the guy on the right side. And there was a game, actually, I believe it was against your Packers, Tim, where Rodgers didn't target the right side of the field against the Seahawks for the entire game. Literally did not throw to that side of the field. So if you had a receiver that was over there, you got 0 points because he didn't even target the position over there. So that's something you want to look at. And that chart shows you percentages of how long they line up in different positions, so you can kind of figure out if they're going to follow the guy, if they're going to stay on the right side or the left side. So it's a excellent tool. And how much was that subscription, Tim? It wasn't that much, like $10 or something.
I think it's like $5 a month. Yeah, something like that. I think a good example last year was Josh Norman. Obviously, he took a little bit of a step back last year, but consistently before, Josh Norman was, especially when he was a Panther, if he was lined up against the guy, you usually are not going to be targeting that guy. And if he lined up on one side, you usually weren't going to target that side. But last year in Washington, not only was he not the same guy, but he consistently stayed on one side. So if you targeted the other side, you were usually good to go.
Yep, agreed. Gerson, anything you want to mention here on the cornerback receiver matchups?
So I like cornerbacks with wide receivers, but I don't really put a lot of implication with top wide receivers. And when I say top wide receivers, I mean the elite of the elite. Like,
agreed.
Like Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know who else can we mention here. Julio Jones, Adam Thielen. You can. That was a combo that I was going to mention with Tim, the Minnesota Vikings. Every week in and week out, you'd be like, oh, who has the better matchup, Stephon Diggs or Adam Thielen? Yep. Thielen was killing it for like 6 weeks. Juju Smith-Schuster and Antonio Brown. Yep. You had to pick your poison. You had to cover one, So, but I remember last year when we did a podcast and DeAndre Hopkins was facing Jalen Ramsey, I believe. Yeah. And I said, I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to get 21 points. And he was like 7,800.
And no one played him. Everyone was scared of Jalen Ramsey.
Everybody was scared. And I got called out on a Facebook post. I got called out on a bunch of stuff. People were like, oh, I don't believe that. So what do you know? DeAndre Hopkins went out there and got 80 yards, like 9 receptions, and a touchdown. 21 points for 7,800. I'm going to take that, Yep. And so, like, Casino, don't be scared of the elite cornerback. More time than often, they usually win. And when I say elite, make sure they're a good wide receiver. Don't be playing Mike Evans versus Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, you're right there. There's a small amount of guys where it doesn't matter. You're going to play them anyway. I think you made a great example of DeAndre Hopkins. No matter who's playing quarterback, they're going to pepper him with targets, and he's going to find a way to – and that's why Madden gave him a 99 rating this year. He's just that guy. It doesn't matter who you line him up against, find a way.
Michael Thomas, like, how many times did he have targets? I mean, that guy was a beast. I think also it matters the cornerback wide receiver matchup because they're smart enough. I remember when Peyton Manning faced the Oakland Raiders and he didn't throw one single pass towards Namdi Asamoah, and he was an elite cornerback at the time. And they asked him, "Hey, why didn't you throw to Reggie Wayne? I think it was his wife. No, Marvin Harrison." And he's like, "Are you kidding me? They have an all-pro cornerback over there, and he's just not letting anything come to him. I'm good. I'll just pick on the other side." And they won, of course. They won.
I will give you all the perfect story of don't overreact to the receiver cornerback position. So I'm going to go to my season long last year, my dynasty, the one that I talk about all the time on the podcast. It was the playoff game. I was in the second round. So if I win this game, basically I move on to the championship round. And it was Kenny Galladay. I had Kenny Galladay and Corey Davis. Kenny Galladay was playing the Bills. And the Bills have a cornerback by the name of Tre'Davious White, who is really, really good.
Yep.
So I benched Kenny Galladay and put in Corey Davis, who I hadn't really played much all season because he hadn't been really that good. And what do you know? Kenny Galladay goes bonkers on Tre'Davious White, and Corey Davis does nothing. I ended up losing my second round game there, and I didn't win a championship. If I had won that game, if I had just played Kenny Galladay, I would have been good. I would have won a championship, and I've been much happier. But unfortunately, I overreacted to the cornerback that they had there and screwed myself. So that's the perfect example of what you do when you look at those matchups. Don't always just go strictly matchups. There's a reason that they're elite receivers because they can beat those kind of guys. So don't overreact.
Yeah, Antonio Brown, Oakland Raiders.
All right, Tim, I'm going to go to you because you talk about this a lot on the podcast during the season. And it's something that people don't really realize or even notice, but it's called the Monday night effect. I think we officially named it here. So talk about the Monday night effect and how that affects your lineups for the following week.
Yeah. So I know the bigger thing is on DraftKings, especially early in the season. The pricing comes out Sunday night, and this is before the Monday night games. So teams that have Monday night games, especially earlier in the season, their prices is not adjusted because the pricing comes out beforehand. So, like you just mentioned, a good one was Kenny Galladay. I think that I remember there was a game last year where the Lions played on a Monday night, and he was clearly far and away the number one option. But because the pricing had already come out, that next week it was just like, you got to play Kenny Galladay. He was just way underpriced. So I know on FanDuel they're a little bit better. At least I remember them being a little bit better about adjusting the prices for matchup ahead of time. But for DraftKings, again, they may change this year, so obviously keep an eye on it. But if there was a Monday night game, they wouldn't, going into the next week, they would always adjust for the matchup, but they wouldn't have those statistics to be able to inflate it on. So you definitely want to take a look at who's getting the most volume, on Monday nights, and then whether or not that correlates to a value play the following Sunday.
Yeah, sometimes too it came down to an injury on Monday night. Like someone can get injured Monday night, so now the receiver that they priced at minimum salary that wasn't going to get any playing time is now suddenly the starter, and he's super cheap the following week. So that's something you want to look at too, because the Monday night effect definitely affects the way you do your lineups. And I know every week that we had that sort of effect. You always pointed out, especially on DraftKings, because you're more of a DraftKings guy, and it does. Those prices will vary quite a bit if that Monday night game ends up being different than what they expect it to be.
No, you're right. I mean, there were times last year where a player would get hurt in the Sunday noon game or in the Sunday afternoon game, and DraftKings would have that adjusted into the pricing before the schedule came out for the next week. But when the pricing comes out on Sunday night, they don't have any ability to adjust it for what happens on Monday. So you're right. If a value opens up on Monday night, you might as well just go ahead and lock that guy in for that next Sunday.
Exactly. All right, we're getting a little long here, so I want to talk about these last couple things, Gerson. If you can just hit on a couple of these. When we say 2 times value, 3 times value, etc., can you explain exactly what that means? And if some new players out there don't know what that means.
Okay, so what it means basically is the price range of the player times the value of the point they got. So if Brock Osweiler is 4,300, which he was, I'm still looking at the same week.
He's still stuck on Brock Osweiler.
Yeah, and he got me, I don't know, let's say
8 points.
Let's look at this. He got me 31 points, which I would never expect in my 4.3 to 31. Divided by 4.3, I'm not going to do the math, it's 7.2 times value. So you do the salary divided by the point projected that they're going to get. So if I have Brock Osweiler, I would have had him in -1, but so basically that's how you do it. You grab the calculation of the salary into the projected point of what you expect them to get, and you divide it.
Yep.
So you want, for GPP, in my personal opinion, you want 3.5 times value. A lot of people have been swaying to cash game being 3 times value now. It used to be 2 times value, but now with so much information out there, so much more tools and whatnot, now they're getting more like, all right, we got to have this, But it really depends how you want it. But again, every position I would say it's differently valued because running backs are a very valuable position and they're the most expensive one. Wide receivers, you have a lot more flexibility with that wide receiver too. You can get a really good value play. Everybody, please ask Jeff. Quarterbacks, of course, they're all priced range differently. Defense, they're always priced down to like from 2,000 to I think like 4,500 or sometimes 5,000. Minnesota Vikings, shout out. But that's how I do value. I think it's very important for people to learn value because you don't want to be, I'm going to play 3 stud quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, Ezekiel Elliott, and Michael Thomas, and that's $30,000 of your $50,000 roster, and then you're gonna fill in all the rest of your roster with $2,000 played or whatever it is. You have to learn how to balance your value.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Just to kind of piggyback real quick on what Gerson said, the reason we come up with these value estimations is just based on historically what is needed in order to cash, right? So consistently in cash games, if you're scoring 150 points in NFL with a 50K salary, that's where we come up with that 3 times value, right?
Right.
You want to take that 50, you want to get to 150 points. That's going to consistently get you a cash game. And then for GPP, like you said, if you want to take it down, you needed consistently over 200 points last year. So you had to look at your lineups and say, can this guy get me 4 times? Can this guy get me 4 times? And usually you're going to have a couple guys, like Gerson said, that you're projecting for 5 to 6 times value, whereas your running back, especially if you're paying way up like 9,000, you're not necessarily expecting him to get 36, but if he comes in at, say, 27 to 30, then he's paying off his salary. So you definitely want the floor, but you always want guys that have plenty of upside. Using my Willie Snead example from earlier, he may have only been 4K, but I don't think he had a single game or maybe had one game where he had more than 16 fantasy points. So if he's not offering you that real upside, in my opinion, there's just not a whole lot of value to be had there.
Agreed. All right, let's go ahead and move on to some DFS myths. So the first one that I wrote down, I wrote a couple of them down here. The first one I wrote down is that you must have exposure to the late games. I know this is probably more of an NBA thing than it is NFL because, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock games aren't that big. But if you're playing like the full slate, the Thursday through Monday game, having that late Monday night guy, enforcing it basically, it's kind of a myth a little bit. You don't have to have exposure to that last that last game of the slate. Tim, we'll go to you first. Just kind of describe this a little bit and what you feel about this this myth of having these late night hammers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it's a little bit different in NFL because usually the main slate is the noon games and then the afternoon games. But when people first see the slate come out, they're thinking, okay, I don't want to have only exposure to the noon games because, they want that quote unquote, like you said, they want that hammer in the afternoons. And a lot of times that is a good idea. But as we were talking about earlier, don't get cute. Play the best guys. If your research points to the fact that the best plays are in the noon games, then play it all the way up. Vice versa, if your research is saying that all of the best matchups are in the afternoon games, don't feel like you have to have exposure to the early games either. It goes both ways.
Yep.
You really just want to look at the slate, figure out what games you most want to target, and kind of not necessarily don't pay attention to what time the game starts or anything like that. I think the one thing that you do have to keep an eye on is that if the later games, obviously, you're so you have an opportunity to kind of be flexible and change. So if you do want exposure to the late games, you just want to make sure that you give yourself some flexibility in case something comes up that you weren't prepared for, whether it be an injury, a late scratch, something like that. So you definitely do want to have, you want to have your exposures to the games that you want, regardless of when they fall on the schedule. Yeah,
a perfect example of that is early on in my DFS sort of career, if you would say. I would try to have that late night exposure, and I would play the 1 o'clock slate only, the 1 p.m. only, and I'd play the full slate, the 1 p.m. and the 4 p.m. And I noticed a lot of times my 1 p.m. only lineup would outscore my lineup that would play the 1 and the 4 because the 1 p.m. games were all higher scoring games. I was forced to start only those players in that 1 p.m. slot, so my lineup actually ended up being better. So having that 4 p.m. slate those guys didn't really help me out too much. So I kind of learned early on that just ignore the time frames, ignore when the games are actually being played. Now, the one thing with NFL too is a lot of times those 4 o'clock games are the premier games. So a lot of times those are the higher score games that you want to have exposure to. So sometimes it's the other way around where you're not having as many 1 o'clock games as you are the 4 o'clock games. So it goes hand in hand, like you said. So Gerson, you want to talk a little bit about this a little bit?
Make it short and simple. If there was not a time on all these games, is it going to matter?
Right.
If all the games were playing on the same slate, are you going to go, I'm going to go target the Bears because they play at 7:05? Actually, one slate. 1:05, But it's all on one slate because they play 5 minutes later, you're going to target them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Yep. Makes no sense. All right, the next one I got in here, and I kind of touched a little bit on it earlier with the guy that I mentioned that was always tweeting me his low exposure guys, but the myth is you have to be contrarian to the point that you sometimes ignore the obvious plays. I know, Gerson, last year, I remember you sort of pounding the table a little bit on James Conner. Sometimes he was just the obvious play each week, and people were kind of going, I'm going to be contrarian, I'm going to play this guy. You're like, just play James Conner. So if you want to talk about this a little bit, this myth of having to be contrarian all the time.
The way you can be contrarian and not be... I honestly believe that running backs are the least position you want to be contrarian at. Because they're the ones that get the most volume. Wide receivers, the second position. Quarterback, the third position. Then tight end, defense, you could be contrarian there because that's where it's going to make a difference. But the way you construct your roster is really what it comes down to. I don't believe in I'm going to play John Brown versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, at 1%.
Yeah.
Because I think he can get that one touchdown. Well, you need a quarterback that can throw him the ball and then you can catch it, But, sure, that's a contrarian play, right? But if he gets you 0 points and his salary was $5,000, you're losing out on a lot of production. And then what happens if, let's say, Michael Gallup at the same price, $5,000 in a different matchup, gets 20 points? You just lost out on 20 points.
Yep.
I mean, you have to be very smart and precise on what you want to do with that kind of construction. I always tell people, if you want to go contrarian, don't get cute with it.
Don't get cute with it. That's going to be our phrase now. That's going to be our opening phrase. Don't get cute with it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a really good chart out there. You might want to look it up, where it talks about the consistency of a player in the NFL paying off his or her paying off his salary based on the amount of the cost, right? The DraftKings salary. So for example, 9,000 plus. Right, so a player that is priced 9,000 or above, a running back pays off almost 73% of the time. A 9,000 plus running back will pay off his salary. For a wide receiver, it's under 45%. So going back to what Gerson was saying, if you're paying up for running back, you're doing it because you're getting that consistency. If you're paying up for wide receiver, it's because you're doing it because you want that upside and you're willing to know that you may not have as high of a floor. So those are just things to keep in mind. One thing that I kind of want to talk about, even though it wasn't necessarily on the schedule, was last year DraftKings had kind of a shift and kind of changed the way that a lot of people did their rosters. Because previously on DraftKings, and I know a little bit FanDuel as well, is you usually wanted to pay down at quarterback, right? You wanted to pay up at running back. You wanted to have one wide receiver, range guys, and a lot of times we'll pay down depending on the week at tight end, but you usually pay down at quarterback. Well, last year, DraftKings kind of adjusted their pricing to where the difference between the lowest quarterback and the highest quarterback, where it may have been $2,000 the year before, it was like $1,000 last year. And so if you were consistently just going in and locking in the lowest priced viable quarterback, you were leaving a lot of points on the table. I think one example I remember from last year was like you could play Eli Manning.
I was going to say Eli.
Yeah, Eli Manning for $5,000 or like Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan for $6,000, right? So the upside that you'd get for one of those guys was way more than the $1,000 difference. So, I mean, obviously last year, Pat Mahomes had one of those crazy seasons where you wanted to try and pay up for him every week that you could. But the old myth, since we're talking about myth, the old myth that you have to pay down at quarterback is just not the case anymore, at least with the pricing changes that we saw on DraftKings last year.
Yeah, another thing, too, with DraftKings that they did better than FanDuel, and Gerson, you play on both sides, too, is DraftKings did a better job, I think, of adjusting prices based on matchups. Whereas FanDuel kind of did it based on their recent history. You know, if a guy was playing good the last 3 weeks, his price would be priced accordingly, whereas DraftKings would look at who they're playing and actually adjust their prices based on matchups better than FanDuel would. What do you think of that, Gerson?
So, well, like, we were talking about pricing. One of the reason why DraftKings can't change their pricing based on the Monday night effect, what we were talking about early on, it's by law that if they put out a play, they put out a salary or whatnot, they can't change it because it's locked into like a gambling effect or something like that. Because by then you're screwing the field. You change something, you know. You're not Vegas. You can't change it, you know. So I think that's what it is. I forgot to mention that earlier on, but it's just like Tim and Jeff are both saying, like, pricing is so critical in DFS, and a lot of people overlook that, and especially for each position, because I always tell people, do you need or do you want this player, you know? Like, because I can say, oh, well, Michael Thomas is 9,800. And people were like, oh, yeah, but Alvin Kamara is 8,000, you know? Well, why can't you have both of them?
Right.
You know? But the thing is, it's like what Tim said, by the time you're constructing your roster, you really have to, like, fully look at every aspect. But if you're getting to the point where you're just like, oh, I don't know, this and that, you're going to really, really go crazy on, and I know we all do this. We all do this. Come Sunday morning, we send each other our rosters. We're like, what do you think? What do you think? You know, and that's a big advice I want to give people. Have people that know DFS, and everybody share your roster to Jeff Lambert on Sunday morning. Ask him, what do you think? No, I'm just kidding. But it's just, that's what I think. Like, everything we broke down, you really want to follow that process.
Yep, agreed. And then the last thing I want to get with is kind of with both of y'all. This is more for new players. I get this question a lot, you know, through my website and different channels. You know, they build their roster, they're done building the roster, they look at it, they go, oh man, I got, you know, $700 left on the table. I can upgrade so-and-so that I really like to so-and-so. You know, should I go ahead and just upgrade them because I have that extra money? So, Tim, we'll go to you first. Talk about leaving money on the table. Is it good or is it bad?
Yeah, honestly, I think that there's two ways you can look at this. First of all, I think that there's a range of amount of money that you can leave on the table and still be optimal. But I think that like all things, there's a limit, right? And I think that it's kind of like you said, it's like that $700 to $1,000 window. If you're leaving more than that amount of money on the table, especially in NFL, there's usually one position you can upgrade, right? So we'll usually, like I mentioned earlier, we'll kind of pay down at tight end some weeks we'll pay down at defense, some weeks we'll take a middle of the road quarterback because it's what we believe to be optimal. But if you get to the end and you're saying, I have $1,000 on the table, you probably can upgrade somebody somewhere. On the flip side, if you have $300, $400, $500 and you're really looking at your roster and you say, there is not a single position on this roster I think I can upgrade from what I believe to my optimal, then just leave it. I mean, I think everybody in here has won money, or their best lineup on a given week was one where they left money on the table.
Yep.
So don't feel like, going back to the phrase of the pod here, don't get cute. If you get to the end and you really like your lineup and you have $200, $300, $400 left, just lock it in and leave it. Because chances are, if you go in and you tinker with something and you change it, you're going to come back going against your research and think, right, nothing is worse than the regret of I had it right the first time.
Yep.
So stick with your research, stick with your process. Like I said, if you come out $200, $300, $400, $500, just leave it, move on to the next. But if you're getting to the end and you have $1,000, chances are there's probably somewhere you could upgrade.
Agreed. And just kind of touching on that point about regret, and I know we've got a mutual friend in one of our groups that does this, but try not to build your lineup too soon. If you're building your lineup for the following week on the Sunday night of the games, you know, previous that week, you're doing it too early. You're going to change your lineup so many times between that Sunday and the following Sunday that it's just not worth it. Wait until you've got more information. You know, I know we always get that. we get that tweet on Sunday Night Football, and we get that, hey, look at this lineup here. Like, dude, it's a week away. Like, why are you making this lineup already? So, Gerson, anything you want to touch on before we get out of here?
Yeah. So leaving salary. The baseball roster I won, I left $2,500 on the book.
Wow.
And I took first place. So I don't know. I know baseball works different than football, but here's the thing. Yeah. One of my top rosters, I remember this when Bila Powell went off, and I think I took like top 10 in the Millie Maker. I think it was like $1,800 left. I could have upgraded my defense, but yeah, guess what? I remember for a fact that defense that was the top tier I would have upgraded to got me 15 points left.
Wow.
So, you know, you're really playing the odds here. But then again, if you're building a cash game roster, I am a firm believer you should not leave more than $500 on the off the the salary.
Yep.
Always remember, and ownership are one of the things that are getting big in the industry. So make sure you look at the ownership. Be like, all right, why is everybody? Okay, does this equal out to my roster? But I definitely agree. Don't freaking build your roster on a Monday, dude. Like, seriously, so many things change. One, there's 3 reasons why. Injuries.
Yep.
Weather.
Yep.
And you haven't listened to the GoingFor2 podcast, dude. Come on, dude.
Yeah, Gerson makes a great point, and I just want to touch on it real quick. One of the easiest ways, we always talk about being contrarian, being different, one of the easiest ways to be contrarian is to leave money on the table, especially in tournaments. So many people, like we said, it's one of the biggest myths out there, feel like they have to spend all of their money. So an easy way to be contrarian is just to leave money on the table. So like Gerson said, if you get to the end and you're looking at your lineup and you're saying, hey, I have, like you said, if it's a tournament lineup and you have $1,500 left on the table and you're thinking, you know what, I really think that this thing has enough upside that I'm going to get enough value from being contrarian with the money left on the table, then go for it. We've all seen it happen where guys win. But I want to say that a study of Millie Maker winners over the last couple of years, they consistently spent $49,500 around that range, right? So which is what he said, 500. So, yeah, you're going to have some weeks where they spend all $50K. You're going to have some weeks where I think one guy won with like $48,800, which was $1,200 left on the table. So, yeah, for tournaments, obviously, you don't want to get too crazy, but you absolutely can leave some money on the table. But, yeah, I was mentioning cash games specifically. If you're leaving $1,000 on the table in your cash games, you probably can upgrade it somewhere.
Yep, agreed 100%. And I don't know about y'all, but I might miss those texts on Sunday night from Asante about what do you think of this roster for next week?
Oh, that was him. Asante. I forgot about that guy. Oh, man. I forgot. I thought you meant someone else. I'm like, who is it?
No, Mr. Asante. He always texts us on a Sunday night talking about the next Sunday about what do you think of this roster? I'm like, you either have already lost your roster for this week because you're already thinking about next week, or you just, I don't know what it is.
And he's the one that probably knows the least about football. So like we try to help him, and then he'll be like, but I think he's a good player this week. He's playing the San Francisco 49ers. Okay, whatever you think, dude. It's only Monday. I haven't even looked at it.
Yeah, Santi had a baby now, so I don't know if he's going to be able to play with us anymore. I don't know if I'll get that Sunday night text anymore. He'll be sleeping, or at least he hopes he'll be sleeping.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we've touched on this too much here, but I want to, of course, mention it since we're talking about strategy. Every sport, NBA, we always talk about you have to be in front of your computer the last half hour before lock because so much information comes out. I feel the same way about Sunday morning. The great thing about football is because of practice reports, we usually know going into Sunday morning, eye scratches that you're not expecting that comes out on Sunday morning, and then you end up seeing that some guy is in the tournament like 10-15% even though he's not playing. So while I wouldn't say it's as high a priority as a sport like NBA, being up on Sunday morning to see those final actives come out is so important because every once in a while, like we talked about earlier, you'll see a guy that's maybe a wide receiver 3 that would normally be like the fourth wide receiver, but the third guy couldn't play, so he's all of a sudden the third guy, and he may have been looking at, say, 20 snaps projection, and now he's looking at a 50 snap projection.
Yep.
And if you're not going in and adjusting your, like Gerson said, adjusting your projections based on inactives on Sunday morning, I also think you're missing a little bit of the edge there. So,
agreed.
And that's what I hate about football season, to be honest. I get no sleep, and I get no life. I have no social life. Tim will tell you, I will wake up like at 7 in the morning, and I'll be on my computer, and I literally like fall asleep like at probably like 3 or 4 because I'm adjusting all my rules, setting my exposure, my stacks, and everything, and I'm going crazy over here. And then I'm like, all right, okay.
Yep. Sunday morning, I grab my phone, I look over, it's Gerson. Are you up yet? Hey, Tim, are you up? I'm making roster. You up?
No, the thing is, like, you legit, this is a big thing. You want to have Adam Chester.
Yep.
Who are the other guys? There's like 4 at the NFL. Chris Mortensen, right?
Chris Mortensen.
Fantasy Lab NFL.
Yep.
There's a bunch of other guys, but you legit want to be on Twitter Sunday morning. That's a big thing. Twitter, you can find so many sources. Oh, I don't know if Antonio Brown's going to play this week. Let's see what is going on. What do? You go to Twitter and you put Antonio Brown injury or whatever.
Yep.
And guess what? All the beat writers are right there telling you the latest thing, because that little latest news can be the difference between you winning a GPP and not catching.
Yep. And just to go on that note, there is a Twitter function that's very underutilized that I use, especially for my DFS NFL preseason rosters. But you can create a list on Twitter where it's just certain accounts that you want to sort of follow, and you can go to that list. I have a list set up with only NFL beat writers. That's all I see. So I click on that list, and the only thing that's going to show up in my feed at that point is NFL beat writers. I just keep refreshing it. And just keep looking
Jeff,
to see.
They can find that at your Twitter, right? They just go to your Twitter and look at your list, right?
Yep, they can go to my Twitter, they click on the little settings button, look at my list. You can subscribe to my list. I got one for NBA, I got one for NFL. For NFL preseason, it's the most important tool for preseason because finding the best player is not what you do in preseason. Find the player that's going to play. That's all you want.
Yep.
As long as he's going to play, that's all you need. And
you can put Jeff Lambert out there. Put Jeff Lambert out there, wide receiver 1. All right, you're gonna get 40 snaps. He's going in all my rosters.
Yeah, definitely. So that's definitely key. So yeah, if you want to go to my Twitter, it's at Jeff Lambert 77. Click on the little settings button. Click on my list. You'll see it says NFL beat reporters. Just subscribe to it. It's everyone that I've ever found that's got any useful information at all. Just hit that refresh button, and you'll find all kinds of useful information. All right, guys, that wraps up our first podcast of 2019 for the NFL. Great stuff again, Tim. Great stuff, Gerson. I appreciate you both coming on a Friday night to talk some NFL with me, even though it's the middle of freaking July. I did want to save this for the end of the podcast. I didn't want to announce it too soon because it's not official yet, and I didn't want DraftKings to hear this. I figured at this point, DraftKings is probably no longer listening, so I can say this. I've got a huge event coming up that's going to be working with DraftKings and with FantasyCares.net. I'm basically going to be getting a free roll for DraftKings of 1,000 people. They're giving away DK swag, DK crowns, DK bucks, everything for this 1,000-man contest. It's free to enter. I'm going to have a page set up where you can actually subscribe or register. I'm going to send out invites. The only thing that we're asking for is for donations to FantasyCares.net. It's a great charity that's set up by Scott Fish. He does the Scott Fish Bowl on Twitter, if you know about that. They raised, I think, $44,000 last year for Toys for Tots. So I'm trying to do this DFS version of the Scott Fish Bowl. Like I said, 1,000 people. If everyone donates $5 to this 1,000-man contest, that's $5,000 that we can donate to Fantasy Cares. I think it's an awesome thing. I'm actually talking to DraftKings on Tuesday, video conferencing, to kind of figure out the pay scale and how we're going to do the contest and set it up. But if you're still listening to the podcast, definitely check that out. I'll have that registration page up here shortly after that I talk to them on Tuesday. As long as I get the final red tape signed off on, I'll release that. I want to fill this contest. I want to get those donations so that hopefully next year DraftKings does the same thing for me, so we can kind of make this a yearly thing. So I wanted to announce that towards the end of the podcast because DraftKings hasn't given me the official word yet that I can do it. So I hope everybody that's listening still wants to join that contest and donate some good money to the charity.
Where are you gonna share it? Twitter?
Yeah, it's gonna be on Twitter. It's gonna be on Facebook. I'm gonna do it pretty much everywhere. So I'm gonna have. So basically, I have the thing set up. I've already talked to a bunch of people that are basically gonna promote it for me. And it's basically, so the first thing, because you know that there's no contest yet. I can't invite someone to a contest that doesn't exist. It's just for week 1. It's a week 1 only contest. And so I'm gonna set up this registration that basically just collects your email and your DraftKings name. So as soon as the contest is live and I have a URL I can send out, I'm going to mass email everybody that registered, join the contest, jump in, please donate to the fantasy care. I actually set up a GoFundMe page that you can donate to the GoFundMe page because I want to send it as a mass sum. So I'm hoping $5,000 is my sort of goal, which is $5 per person. I'm hoping that I can get more than that. I'm hoping that people donate more than just $5 because, it's a free contest. You're getting some free swag. You're getting some, maybe you're getting some DK bucks, some DK dollars. You can play in some more tournaments. I think it's worth more than just $5, but $5 is my.
I'll donate more than $5. I think I got you.
Yeah, you just won $50K. I think you can do more than $5. Maybe $6 you can give to me, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I have to talk to Jason. He's my accountant.
He's your accountant. Yeah, so definitely, guys, be on the lookout for that. I'm hoping, like I said, Tuesday I talked to DraftKings. I think that's the final straw that needs to fall. And then Wednesday I'll be sharing that page pretty much everywhere that I'm, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on all the podcasts. I'll be reaching out to everybody that, has ever asked me for a favor to ask them to promote it so we can get this contest filled and make it a good event overall. And then obviously donate to charity as well. So be on the lookout for that. Tim, Gerson, anything y'all want to say before we get out of here?
I'm good. I'm so excited for football season. Let's go, baby.
Let's go. Exactly. I can't wait. Can't wait. I think all 3 of our teams should be better than they were last year. What do y'all think?
I hope so.
I hope so, baby. Go, Pack, go.